Humans are unique in their mating system in at least 3 respects. One is the evolution of concealed ovulation. I did have one male graduate student who claimed he could detect when women were ovulating, but he turned out to make many false claims and we had to kick him out of graduate school. Then you have the evolution of long-term pair bonds. And then the third is male parental investment.
Why do people cheat?
On average, for men, it's desire for sexual variety. The women who cheat tend to be very unhappy with their primary relationship. The first thing men want to know is, did you f*** him? First thing women want to know of their husbands is, are you in love with her?
Professor David Buss, welcome to TRIGGERnometry.
Thank you. Delighted to be talking to you.
Oh, it's great to have you on. We've had one of your students on in the past, Anna Fleischman, who we were talking about before we started. You are, of course, one of the, widely regarded as one of the founders of the field of evolutionary psychology. First of all, before we're going to have a great conversation about men, women, and all the rest of it, what is evolutionary psychology?
Well, there are many ways to answer that question. It's a great question. One level is that it's simply psychology looked at through the lens of evolutionary theory. A slightly deeper explanation would be that just as our body evolved, and we have many components of our body, a liver, lungs, heart, larynx, etc., and we analyze the body by what their functions are. That's a key critical point. You couldn't understand what the liver is all about if you didn't understand its functions, which includes detoxifying toxins. And similarly, evolutionary psychologists argue that the mind, housed in our brain, which is a physical structure, evolved through the same process of evolution by selection, sexual and natural selection. And that we have to analyze the brain and the component parts of the brain as a suite of evolved psychological mechanisms. And we have to understand what their purposes are, what their functions are, what were they designed to do, just as analogously we were trying to understand what the liver or the hearts or the lungs are designed to do. So, and then we have to do the hard work, of saying, well, what are these psychological mechanisms? How are they designed? And what is their function? And how does input from the environment influence their activation or deactivation? How do they interact with other psychological mechanisms and eventually produce output, which on average is directed towards solving adaptive challenges of survival or mating. So,
and I know that scientists don't really deal in truth claims, they deal in theories of how things are, but from a layman perspective, a kind of obvious question might be, how do we know that what evolutionary psychologists say or claim or believe is true or accurate?
Well, so that all rests with the specificity of the hypotheses. So you develop a hypothesis. So let's say I've developed hypotheses around sexual jealousy. That sexual jealousy is an evolved emotion, contrary to what most psychologists have argued over the history of psychology, that it's a pathology, it's a sign of immaturity, it's a neurosis, it's a psychosis, it's a delusion. But that jealousy, sexual jealousy, evolved for a mate-guarding function. And that it gets activated under specific circumstances. And so we can develop specific empirical predictions from the hypothesis, and then you test those and see whether they are confirmed or disconfirmed. And then the hypothesis is either supported or disconfirmed by the empirical evidence. And so there's this, ultimately it all boils down to probability statements, that it is improbable that it's not designed because we've identified these 13 design features of sexual jealousy. It's activated, for example, when there's a threat to the valued relationship. an interloper. We call them mate poachers in the jargon. Or when they're accused to infidelity, given by your regular committed partner, or even when there are things where there's no infidelity and no mate poachers, but there's a what we call a mate value discrepancy. So let's say, normally people hook up, they mate assortatively. So with the 8s with the 8s, 6s with the 6s, and so forth. But let's say a man or a woman, gets an enormous pay jump, or they become a star, an actress, or an actor, and their status rises dramatically. It can create a mate value discrepancy where none previously existed. And that can trigger sexual jealousy as well. Because we know, and this is another empirical prediction that's been supported, that when there's a mate value discrepancy, there's a higher probability that the higher mate value person will cheat or dump their partner and trade up to a higher mate value person. And so what the game is simply normal science. Does this suite of predictions pan out empirically when we do the studies? And so to the degree that they do, then we increase our support for the probability of the hypothesis being correct. And the onus on evolutionary psychologists is often somewhat greater than that on non-evolutionary psychologists, in the sense that we assume or hypothesize universality of design. So just as like if you were to go to an entirely different culture, you wouldn't expect the body to be differently designed. Some people have a heart, other people don't have a heart. Some people have a liver, other people don't. So we assume that just as there's universality of our body design, we hypothesize that there should be universality of our psychological design as well.
And David, I can't believe I'm asking you this question, but I think it needs to be asked. If we look at the two genders through the lens of evolutionary psychology, what are the fundamental differences between the two genders?
Well, so I distinguish between sex and gender.
Okay, the two sexes.
To start with, yeah. So
I'm very well.
So biologists define sex simply by the size of the gametes. Mm-hmm. So males are the ones with the small gametes, females with the large ones. So sperm are basically small packets of DNA with an outboard motor and basically nothing else. Eggs are large, many times the size of sperm, and nutrient rich. And so that's the definition of sex, according to biologists, 99.9% of all biologists. So your question is, what is the difference between them?
Yeah, what is the key difference?
So from this small beginning of an asymmetry in gamete size flows a tremendous avalanche of other biological differences in our reproductive anatomy, in our reproductive physiology. So fertilization occurs internally within women, not within men. And that 9-month period of gestation is obligatory. It's an obligatory parental investment. And so one act of sex can result in that 9-month period of investment by women, and at a minimum, and 0 investment by the man at a minimum. Now, fortunately, men often do more than the minimum, and so sometimes they make up for that gap. But so from the get-go, there's this asymmetry in obligatory investment, and that cascades to a bunch of other things. So another component of human reproductive physiology is lactation. So men don't lactate, women do lactate, over 99% of human evolutionary history, an infant would die without that breast milk. And so that's so now of course we have formulas, and you can even buy breast milk that was produced by other women. There are breast milk banks you can go to, but ancestrally there weren't. And so that's another, at least historically over human evolutionary history, an obligatory investment that women put in. So what you have is a suite of adaptive problems that follow from these sex differences in our reproductive biology. So one of them, for example, is, I just kind of alluded to, is sexual jealousy, where because fertilization occurs internally within women, women are 100% certain they are the mothers of their children. So no woman ever gave birth, and as the child is emerging from her body, wondered, "Gee, is this kid really my own?" They know it's their own 100% certainty, maternal certainty. Men can never be sure, because the woman could have had sex with another man, and it could be another man's child. And so this creates a fundamental problem. So humans are, if I could back up one step here, humans are unique in their mating system in at least three respects, three pivotal respects. Okay, one is the evolution of concealed ovulation. So if you compare humans with our chimpanzee primate relatives, and chimpanzees are with whom we are genetically related more than 98%, they have, the female has a very visible estrus. She gets the large red genital swellings. She emits olfactory cues, and the males basically go wild when into a kind of a sexual frenzy of attraction to her during that estrus phase. And women don't have anything remotely like that. I mean, I did have one male graduate student who claimed he could detect when women were ovulating, but he turned out to make many false claims, and we had to kick him out of graduate school. But you can't walk down the street or walk into a party and say, "Oh, this woman's ovulating. She's not. She's ovulating. She's not." We don't have anything. Whereas male chimps easily detect it, and humans can detect it as well. So you have concealed ovulation. Then you have the evolution of long-term pair bonds, which is also somewhat unique. So there's no other primate species that's like humans in forming long-term committed relationships where they're with one mate for long committed periods of time. Pair bonding. We have the attachment system that comes into play there, and then you have the emotion of love, which when I was an undergraduate, I was taught it was a Western, an invention by some European poets a few hundred years ago. But love, I think, is an evolved emotion that in the context of romantic relationships evolved specifically for long-term committed romantic relationships. So you have that, and then the third element in the three big pillars of how we are at least somewhat unique is male parental investment. Mm-hmm. So even though women have the obligatory investment, men do a tremendous amount. Not all men. A lot of men don't do anything. So, and abandonment is a real thing. But some men invest tremendously in protecting, provisioning, caring for their offspring. So this is so these three things really change the ground rules of human mating, and make us somewhat unique. So, but getting back to your question, sorry for rambling here, but that because the fertilization occurs internally within women, not within men, men can never be sure. So paternity certainty is always less than 100%, at least prior to, now we can do DNA fingerprinting and you can verify with certainty whether this kid is actually yours. But historically, you couldn't. So men had to, in order for heavy male parental investment to have evolved, men had to evolve adaptations to increase the probability that that kid is their own. Because if they didn't, then they're spending a decade, 2 decades of their investment in a rival's offspring. And just from a purely reproductive standpoint, that's a road to reproductive disaster. You're helping the reproductive success of your rivals or the rival who inseminated your partner at your expense. So, so I think sexual jealousy is one of those adaptations, psychological adaptations. So you have pre-mate selection, where one of the things that's valued by men is cues to sexual fidelity. Is this potential partner going to be sexually faithful to me? And these are all probabilistic cues, because you can't know. You can have I don't know, a woman who's a virgin and seems totally honest, and then 3 years into the marriage, she has an affair. Now, we know that infidelities do occur, but so you have premarital selection, and that gets down to mate choice, preferential mate choice, and men do look for cues to promiscuity, for example, because it's a law of psychology. Best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if she's had a huge, I guess they call them nowadays body count. What is your body count? I study murders. When I think of body count, I think of serial killers, not number of sex partners. But the younger generation refers to body count as how many people you've had sex with, and so. If a woman has had sex with a large number of partners prior to marriage or prior to commitment, then there's a higher probability that she's going to be having sex with someone else after you've committed.
Is that why they say that men always exaggerate their body count and women always downplay their body count?
The news doesn't just tell you what's happening. It often tells you what to think is happening. And these days, the biggest red flag isn't what's said, it's what gets left out. That's why I use Ground News. It's the only app that compares how the same story is covered across the political spectrum and show you what whole audiences are not being told. The blind spot feed is one of my favorite features. Every day, it flags upwards of 20 stories that are being ignored either by the left or the right. Follow along at ground.news/trigonometry. Like this, a new study from UC San Diego found that climate change cost almost twice as much as we thought because earlier estimates left out damage to the oceans. That's a pretty big update, and yet no coverage. Literally zero came from right-leaning outlets. Or this, a recent Gallup poll found trust in the media has hit a record low, with just 28% of Americans saying they trust newspapers, radio, and TV to report the news accurately and fairly. That's a staggering result, but if you only read left-leaning news, you likely never saw it at all. Go to ground.news/trigonometry to get 40% off their Unlimited Advantage plan, the same one we use, and stop being managed by the media.
Well, that's an interesting question, and that is true. So if you all the surveys show men report a higher number of sex partners than women, which can't be correct mathematically, because the averages, the means have to be identical, assuming an equal sex ratio in the population. So what's going on here? So what's going on, I think, is at least 3 things. So one is, yes, men tend to exaggerate. So, oh yeah, I touched her arm, that's one. But on the flip side, women tend to downplay, or underestimate their number of sex. Well, that really didn't count. We were just fooling around, and it wasn't serious, and so you get sort of a reporting bias on both sides. But there's a third factor that's involved, and that is that almost all the studies that have been done on these body count numbers don't include prostitutes. So if you include prostitutes, so let's say a prostitute can have sex with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guys, then there's one study that included prostitutes and did the statistical calculations and found that the numbers of men and women reporting sex partners were almost identical. And that is because prostitution is 99% plus a male consumer, I don't know what you call it.
Activity.
Activity, yes, thank you. I was looking for a word, thank you, activity. And so if men are including, I had sex with this prostitute and that prostitute, that's 3 or 4 right there, then their body count is going to be higher. So, but I think all 3 variables are at work: males exaggerating, women underreporting, and then inclusion of prostitutes is another issue.
David, I was wondering, as you were speaking about paternal uncertainty, is that the reason that almost every society, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, correct me on this if I am, but societies have evolved mechanisms for restricting and controlling female sexuality to sort of prevent women from sleeping around a lot? Is that why?
Yes, but the way I'd phrase it is it's typically the families of the women that have developed means of trying to restrict and cloister the females. They do mention, this is actually a study that Diana Fleischman and I did with another graduate student. We call it the daughter guarding hypothesis, where, and we showed it even in America, parents devote more effort to monitoring and restricting their daughters' sexual activity than their sons. So, and that's the more modest dress, setting curfews or when the child has to be back home and in bed, etc. And so, but it's typically the families of the daughters that do this sort of thing, and it ranges all the way to genital mutilation, to clitoridectomy and fibulation, where it's the women within the family that inflict these genital wounds on their daughters, on the young females, because it increases their mate value on the mating market. And so families are very concerned about their daughters' sexual reputation, because mating and marriage historically have not been just one man, one woman. It's been that the family's gotten involved and influences it, and it's often a political alliance or economic alliance between 2 families. And so they want to ensure, or they strive to ensure, the highest mate value, which is sexual reputation of the girls in their family, the daughters and women in their family.
And you mentioned mate value, and you talked about, one person's pay going up or whatever. I imagine what makes up a male mate value is very different than what makes female mate value on a number of things.
Yeah. So, we have to distinguish between male and female mate value. We also have to distinguish between the long-term mate value and short-term sexual value, if you will. And where this, so I assume we're talking about long-term mate value. And yes, there's if you look at the components that make up for mate value, many of them are actually shared by the sexes. So intelligence, dependability, kindness, good health, etc. There are many shared components, but there are basically 2 clusters of sex-differentiated contributors to mate value. So On the male side, it is his economic or financial provisioning, as well as his willingness to channel those resources to a specific woman and her offspring. So, and that's an important distinction, because it's not just the number of digits in his bank account or stock portfolio. I mean, he can be Elon Musk, but if he's unwilling to channel those resources to a particular woman, then his mate value is correspondingly lower. And so those are more important components to a man's mate value than to a woman's, as well as a slightly older age. So women universally prefer partners who are a few years older than they are, not ancient, but typically a few years older. You do get, in some cases, very large age discrepancies, but those are rare. So like a modern example would be Bill Belichick, the football coach, his girlfriend is apparently, I guess, in her mid-20s or so, and he's in his, I think, 70s. But typically it's more, women prefer guys who are a few years older but not ancient. On the female side, you get youth and beauty. So physical attractiveness looms much larger in a woman's mate value than a man's. And people don't like this finding.
By people, you mean women. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just making a joke.
It goes against, because again, what I was taught when I was undergraduate, and I'm sure you've all heard these phrases like beauty's only skin deep, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder, you can't judge a book by its cover. But in fact, physical appearance provides a wealth of information about a woman's health status and her fertility. Most important, her fertility. And so we know, for example, that while it used to be believed that beauty standards were infinitely cross-culturally variable, we know now that they're not. There are at least some components that contribute to physical attractiveness that are universal. So clear skin, clear eyes, smooth skin, lustrous hair, full lips, a waist-hip ratio of roughly 0.7, low waist-hip ratio, basically cues to youth and cues to health. Cues to youth because youth is very highly correlated with fertility. So we know we know what the fertility curves are for women and for men. And for women, they tend to peak in their, say, early to mid 20s, where women are most fertile, and then it declines with time. So much more steeply for women than for men. Now, fertility also declines for men, but much more gradually. So you do have men who are in their 60s, 70s, and occasionally older that actually do reproduce. So I think of two recent examples would be
Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger would be one, but I was thinking of Al Pacino, and I think it's Robert De Niro also they're pretty old at this point, but they've had children, of course, obviously with much younger women who are still fertile. So this is a fundamental sex difference, one that people don't like, and but I don't make these things up. You have to go with the data, and so these are fundamental differences in our reproductive biology. It wasn't sexist male scientists who invented the fact that fertility declines more rapidly in women than in men. It's just a biological fact. So getting back to your question, so you have, those are the two big clusters of sex differentiated components of mate value. Resources and the ability to contribute those resources, and then youth and physical attractiveness. And people don't like either of those, actually. So, because people say, well, so you're saying women are gold diggers. Well, no, I'm not saying women are gold diggers. You have this fundamental asymmetry in parental investment where you think of our ancestral mothers and their mothers and their mothers and their mothers. What would have aided a woman and her children's survival and their reproductive success? Well, an investing male who offered protection and provision and resources, and who could ensure or increase probability of the survival of the woman and the children. And so it's perfectly reasonable why women universally have evolved this standard of their mate preferences and what contributes to male mate value. And from a man's point of view, every one of us, we are all the descendants of fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, all of whom have preferred to mate with fertile women. So if they preferred to mate with infertile women, we wouldn't be here. It would have broken this inviolate chain of reproduction. So we are all, I mean, this is, we could pat ourselves on the back. We're all evolutionary success stories in that sense. We've all come from this long, unbroken chain of successful males and females, all of whom have made wise mate choices and gotten through these tremendous slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to give rise to who we are here today.
And when you were saying we're all evolutionary success stories, I was thinking back to my teaching career. I've taught a few kids who weren't evolutionary success stories, David, but let's not focus on that. Now, that is very interesting what you were talking about, because as you were well aware, over the last few years, there has been a revolution in mating, which has been the internet and apps and everything else. So how has that kind of changed our predilections, what we look for, and how has that changed the relationships between the sexes more broadly?
Yeah, well, that's a great question and a complex question, and there isn't one simple answer. So what I can offer is some thoughts on the question, and without attaching an undue amount of certainty to those thoughts. So one thing is, so ancestrally, we would have encountered perhaps a few dozen potential mates in our entire lifespan, because we didn't have cars, airplanes, internet, or anything else, so you're geographically limited. And now we live in large urban settings, and then the internet with dating sites, they provide us access to thousands or potentially millions of potential mates who live thousands of miles away. They can be in another country, and sometimes are. So this is one huge, what we call an evolutionary mismatch. And sometimes this produces, and I think this is a speculation, but a reasonable one, decision paralysis. So they've shown this in studies of, you go to a high-end supermarket and they have these 6 jams you can taste, and then you taste several and then say, oh, I like the peach or whatever, and you buy one. But they've shown if you give people 24, they taste them and they just can't decide. There's too many to decide. It's decision paralysis. And I think some of that goes on in the mating world. So you get, well, there's so many potential mates to choose from, and I got matched with this person, no, that person, and maybe there's someone just a little bit better, on the next match. And so I think there's this reluctance to commit to one choice, whereas in ancestral environments, you have just a few to choose from, and you choose one and make the commitment. So that's one. Another thing that I think that really skews things is that what you get on the internet dating profiles is you get photographs and then written descriptions. So I like fishing, or I'm into rugby, or whatever. I like heavy metal rock, whatever the case.
It's an interesting woman you're describing. She likes fishing, rugby, and heavy metal.
I think she doesn't sound straight, is I think what we're saying.
Well, hey, there's assortative mating, so there are mates for all sorts of interests. So, but I think that what you have is what happens is the photograph is a visual image that tends to overwhelm all other sources of information, and so people make their decisions heavily based on the photographs, and so physical appearance takes on a much larger share of people's attention than it would be as contrasted with meeting people in real life. There's the thing called in real life. You've probably heard of it.
IRL.
It used to happen. But when you meet someone in real life, there's a whole host of other information. I mean, you get olfactory cues, which women are very sensitive to, and most people don't know this, but women have a greater olfactory acuity than men do, and so they can smell things that men can't smell, which is why men have, like, the woman walks into a guy's apartment, he thinks it stinks or whatever, and he doesn't notice anything. So. But one of the things that it's another sex difference, that visual information is much more important to men than to women. It's important to women, but women tend to use all sorts of other senses. So olfaction, how does the guy sound, vocal qualities, intonation, and so forth. So none of those can you get from a pallid written description and then an overwhelming photograph. Now, of course, then we know the photographs are somewhat deceptive. People post photographs that are not truly representative of what they actually look like. They might be old, or they might be filtered or photoshopped, or there are even like websites where you can go to take the best selfie possible to post, and then you meet the person in real life. That's not what they look like. So I think that this, but all this other information that you can glean from meeting in real life, and not just one-time meeting, because that even provides a very restricted informational window, meeting someone over time. So when people are thinking about getting serious, I'm not in the advice business, but I give them this piece of advice. I say, go on a vacation together to a place that neither of you have been and you're unfamiliar with. And so you have to grapple with novel challenges, different culture, different, ways of getting around, different food, and so forth. And so you can see how people react to the novel information, to stresses and strains. Do they get thrown out of whack by a minor, a pebble of a strain, or are they resilient? Do they cope well and adapt well to these different circumstances? You go for a week or two with someone, then you find out a lot of information about someone. So in short, it's a long-winded answer to your question, which is a really good one, is that I think there are a number of mismatches between the way we selected mates ancestrally and the way we do through internet dating. I think it's something like 40% of all people now meet through internet in one form or another. The other piece of advice I give is to stop messaging, just meet the person. Start out with having coffee together or lunch together, and then go from there. And if there's some connection, that's the other thing, is a connection or romantic spark or a sexual spark. Is there chemistry that you have with each other? And that's hugely important.
Well, that is the most important thing. And it's really interesting when you see these apps, because they over-index for pictures and particularly looks, whilst some people may not be photogenic, some people may be incredibly charismatic, some people may be witty, funny, whatever it may be. So I guess my question is this. Is it true about the apps that it's 20% or 15% of the guys who look great in their pictures, who take all the girls, and everybody else is left with nothing? Or is that kind of a misrepresentation of what's actually happening?
Yeah, I think it's a misrepresentation. I mean, there is a skew. I mean, some guys get more hits than others, get more attention. But one of the nice things about the modern environment is that there are so many different niches or ways to improve your mate value for some people, but not for others. So I mentioned, I don't know, the heavy metal, but some people are into certain types of music. So I'll give you an example. So I know a woman, a friend of mine, who she's trilingual and really values guys who know Russian literature so that she can have in-depth conversations about Tolstoy. Now, this is that if you have those qualities, you will be very high in mate value in her eyes, but irrelevant in most other people's eyes. But we have many, many of those kind of, what you can call idiosyncratic value systems that can elevate someone's mate value. And so, then the other aspect of it is that a good mating strategy is not to go where the heaviest competition is. So if everybody is fighting over the same mate, then you're much better off going for someone who is not at the center of that attention. So, so now, do people struggle on the mating market? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's this phenomenon that the modern word for them is incels, guys that have difficulty attracting women.
But that's always been the case, hasn't it?
It's always been the case. Yeah, it has always been the case. And however, in the past, so we just didn't have a name for them.
Well, it's that, but also I don't think it was an identity. That's I think a big difference with incels is it's not guys who struggle, as I understand it, but do correct me. It's not guys who struggle with women. It's guys who struggle with women so much they give up on trying to find a mate.
Yeah, and some of them...
And make an identity of discussing it with other people who they found who share that situation. Right, which can result in a misogynistic echo chamber of, Jim Morrison had the Doors had the quote of, women seem wicked when you're unwanted, and there's some truth to that, but you're absolutely right that there have always been incels without that identity or name. But the other thing is, so I have a graduate student now, William Costello. We've had him on the show. Sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
A couple of times actually.
Oh okay. Yeah. Well, he's studied incels, and so he is probably the world's expert on incels right now, professionally, not personally. But one of the things that he's found is that they tend to be a bit spectrumy, so they have difficulty with social mind reading, and so that impairs their ability to have interesting conversations with women, and also some anxiety about it. So they get a dating anxiety or mating anxiety when they talk to women. So, but these are actually conditions that are curable, because you have, and one of the things that, many psychological abnormalities are not curable. So schizophrenia, we can't do anything about. But anxiety, specific anxiety disorders are very, very curable. It's one of the few things that we know. If you have snake phobia, flying anxiety, fear of flying, or and we're actually looking into mating anxiety and ways to reduce that, because you have these guys who are perfectly reasonable in their mate value, but have this anxiety which inhibits their ability to approach women and have conversations with them. So it's not they shouldn't give up. These are fixable problems.
And it's very interesting now that we're talking about incels, because they have the myth of the Chad, which is the myth, and that's the terminology for the guy who's really buff, really handsome.
Yeah.
And, you know, every woman wants him. And you go, all right, okay, so there are guys who are more popular with women. I mean, that's just obvious. But there is a type of guy online who is high mate value, who on Hinge or Tinder or whatever it may be, he can literally go out and have a date every night of the week if he wants.
Yeah.
And then they would say that those women would gravitate to those types of men. So it's those types of men who are getting most of the matches.
Yeah. Well, but for short-term sexual hookups, you know, I would say. So, you know, this is where sites like Tinder, you know, I wouldn't advise any woman to go on a site like Tinder, because first of all, 30% of the men on Tinder are in relationships or married, you know, and so they're looking for short-term hookups, sexual hookups. So if you're looking for a long-term mate, you don't want to go on Tinder. You want to go on a dating site that is more geared toward long-term relationships and compatibility.
Yeah.
So maybe for those incels who are resentful about the Chads who are getting these short-term hookups, well, you know, that's another mismatch. Again, evolutionary mismatch. Ancestrally, there was no such thing as this large pool of single people. They didn't exist. So ancestrally, and in almost all hunter-gatherer societies, traditional societies, women get married, all fertile women get married, and they reproduce. And so there's not this pool of singles like you have now.
Spring is a wonderful time of year, right up until you're standing on a job site at 7 in the morning, wondering why your trousers are already soaked through and your pocket is 6 inches from where you expected it to be. Truewerk makes workwear that is actually built around those conditions. The T2 work pant has 4-way stretch so you can bend, kneel and climb without the fabric fighting you. A water-resistant finish so a shower doesn't immediately ruin your morning. And 9 pockets positioned where trade professionals said they actually needed them, not where someone guessed. It will not surprise you to learn that I am not exactly a man who works with his hands. The closest I get is watching someone else fix my boiler, so I'll let the reviewers handle this. Matthew Hobbs says he has never been able to find such comfortable, durable, and great-fitting work pants until now. And CJR wrote, they fit right the moment I tried them on. Truewerk workwear has been tested over 10 years by people working in real conditions out on the tools. Upgrade to the T2 work pant and stay comfortable no matter what the day brings. Get 15% off your first order at truewerk.com with code TRIG. That's TRUEWERK.com, code TRIG. Truewerk, built like it matters, because it does.
And we've obviously returned, I was going to say strayed, but we returned to the topic of infidelity. Would I be right in saying that cheating is an evolutionary adaptation?
The way...
Did we evolve to be monogamous, I guess is what I'm asking.
I would say, I would rephrase the question. So the way I would phrase it is, have we evolved a long-term mating strategy? And I would say, yes, we have, as one strategy within our repertoire of mating strategies. So do we have adaptations for long-term pair-bonded attachment, committed mating? Yes. Do we also have adaptations for short-term mating? I would say yes. Do we have adaptations for EPC mating, extra-pair copulation mating? I would say yes to that as well. So which particular mating strategy an individual pursues depends on a variety of factors. Mate value, problems in the relationship, and this is actually something we're working on right now, is different forms of infidelity, different forms of cheating. So you have sexual infidelity, which is obvious, but you also have emotional infidelity, and then you also have financial infidelity or resource infidelity. So it turns out, I was surprised at these stats. I didn't do these studies, but something like a third of married people have secret bank accounts or credit cards that they have the bills mailed to their office rather than their home, and conceal debt or other stocks or resources that they have that they don't want their partner to share in. So there's financial infidelity, emotional infidelity, and sexual infidelity, and humans do all three.
And why do people cheat?
Well, there are sex differences there, which won't surprise you.
No.
For men, there's going to be generalizations for which many exceptions occur. But on average, for men, it's desire for sexual variety. You know, it's something like 70%, 75% of men. It's an opportunity presented itself when I was at this conference, and I hooked up with this woman while I was there. It was sexual variety. For women,
sorry, just to pause there, David.
Yeah.
Is that why when you watch like a movie and the woman goes to the man, "Why did you do it?" and he goes, "It meant nothing."
Yeah, yeah, and often it does mean nothing. So often that is an accurate statement. But this is interesting. So let me just finish on women.
Yeah.
And then I want to return to this point that you raised here. So for women who have affairs, something like one study shows 79% of them become emotionally involved with or fall in love with their affair partner. And this is very distracting. For men, it's more like 20, 25, 30%. It's much lower. So this is a huge sex difference. And that reveals something fundamentally different about why women cheat versus why men cheat. And that is, for women, it's what I call the mate switching function. That is, women who cheat, and this is going to sound really obvious, but it's not. Women who cheat tend to be very unhappy with their primary relationship. And you say, okay, tell me something more obvious than that. Well, if you look at men who cheat and men who don't cheat, there's no difference in how happy they are with their relationship. And so there's a big sex difference in predictors of who cheats. Now, men who are perfectly happy in their relationships can cheat if the costs are low, the opportunity presents itself, the risks are low, risks of discovery, and so forth. For women, it's much more meaningful, and so it's what I call, I think, if you ask the question, why do women cheat? I think the majority do it for mate switching function. Now, it might be there are varieties of mate switching. So it could be she's really unhappy with her primary relationship, and she's looking to see what is my mate value if I were to leave this? How desirable are the people who are attracted to me? Or it might be she meets someone at work, falls in love with them, and switches to him. Or after years of an unsatisfying relationship, the affair gives her confidence that she can do well on the mating market and causes her to exit the relationship. And it's actually, I'm not recommending this, but it's, quote, effective as a way of exiting, in the sense that it's one of the two leading causes of divorce worldwide, is sexual infidelity. So have sexual infidelity and it gets revealed, which often it does over time if it lasts for any amount of time, then men don't like that. Getting back to that paternity uncertainty issue. And so it's a pretty cool study done by a former student of mine, Barry Cooley is his name, where he analyzed the episodes of this, it's no longer exists, but a reality show called Cheaters. What they did is they had, if you suspected your partner of cheating, you could call them up and they would put a detective on your partner. And so then if the detective spotted your partner going into the no-tell motel, then the detective would call and say, hi, we've discovered your partner just walked in with another person into the no-tell motel. Do you want to come down and confront them? And so that what he analyzed is the verbal interrogations of people who confronted their partners as they're walking out of the no-tell motel. And what he found is that the first thing men want to know is, did you fuck him? Did you have sex with him? First thing women want to know of their husbands is, are you in love with her? So there's this huge sex difference because women are more forgiving. They don't like it at all, but they're more forgiving if it doesn't really mean anything. But if the guy's in love with another woman, that's going to signal that he's going to defect over the long term and devote his resources and commitment to another woman.
But that must make women quite paranoid, really, because in a way, if someone really cheats on you because of love, you go, right, well, maybe I didn't care enough, maybe I wasn't sympathetic enough, maybe I didn't do enough, maybe, I just wasn't a good partner. But you can be the most amazing partner in the world, and he's still going to go off and shag someone else. That must put you in a state of paranoia, doesn't it?
The comedian Chris Rock said men are only as faithful as their opportunity. So no, I think that's an exaggeration. There are men who could cheat but remain faithful for moral reasons, for religious reasons, because they don't want to jeopardize their relationship. But yeah, you can see that sometimes with, an older example would be the actor Hugh Grant, who had a long-term relationship with Elizabeth Hurley, who was at the time one of the top models in the world, regarded as gorgeous, beautiful, sexy, etc. And he was found having sex with a hooker in Los Angeles in a car, and people are just like totally baffled by it. It's like, why you have Elizabeth Hurley, drop dead gorgeous, and why would you have sex with a prostitute in Los Angeles? And of course, he didn't have an explanation for that, but we do. It's just simply someone who's different. That desire for sexual variety, which is, I view it as evolution has played a nasty trick on men. So this is not a good thing for men, because what it means is that we have these desires that can never be successfully implemented, unless maybe you're Mick Jagger or a king or an emperor or somebody like that.
But there must be variation within men. So if with female infidelity, as I understand it, the single biggest predictor is happiness in the relationship, right? If a woman's unhappy, the risk goes up significantly. Right. What about for a man? There must be, is it he's a cheater, as in like he's just born to seek sexual variety more than other men? Or is there, if you're a woman, how do you sort of go, oh, he might be into this?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And there are, I think, several factors that contribute to it. One is there are individual differences among men. So some men are more novelty-seeking. Some men are higher on what we call sociosexual orientation. They're more short-term oriented and will cheat if the opportunity arises. And there are other men who would not dream of cheating even if the opportunity. So just to give an example, Oh, here is an example, again, from older time, but there used to be this, for the younger generation, this actor called Paul Newman. And in his heyday, he was like viewed as the, I don't know who would be the modern analog, Brad Pitt, or maybe he was too old now, but he was drop dead gorgeous.
Jason Momoa.
Sorry?
Jason Momoa would probably be the...
Okay, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
He would be the perfect example of in the modern day era. So, but he was asked once. So Paul Newman met and married Joanne Woodward, an actress, and they were married for 50 years. And he never, as far as we know, never cheated on her. Even he had a million opportunities to do so. And he was asked by a journalist, why do you remain faithful given you have all these opportunities? And he said, why eat hamburger out when you have steak at home? And that was his answer, so I have this.
I'll pause it there. Sometimes you've had a few drinks, you just fancy a hamburger.
Well, you're outing yourself, mate.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that was, and that made him even more attractive to women. That
Right.
he was so loyal and faithful to her. So, same with another example is Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States. Who said in an interview that he had lust in his heart, and that he had committed adultery many times in his heart, but never in actuality, and probably could have. He's a very high status guy. And as you know, many presidents have committed adultery in the past, going back to JFK. But there's this discrepancy, and this reveals the difference between our desires and implementing those desires in our behavior. And Jimmy Carter, I think, was a very religious person, and he also was very dedicated to his wife, and so it would violate his religious beliefs, his sense of morality. And so I think there are, to get back to your question, large individual differences in men in their willingness to act on their desire for sexual variety. I think the desires still exist in most men, but some men inhibit their desires. And then, as Chris Rock said, some men don't have the opportunity.
And David, let's talk about the dark side, particularly of male sexual desire. Why is it that men stalk? Why is it that men are abusive, either verbally or physically? I've recently added a new daily ritual to support digestion and help me feel more comfortable after meals. That's why I was so interested in Mass Zymes by BiOptimizers. BiOptimizers has been around since 2004, and they're still a founder-owned company. Their whole thing is quality and formulation first. They've even got their own in-house lab team, and they test raw ingredients because in supplements, that part matters more than most people realize. Mass Zymes is their digestive enzyme product, and what sets it apart is that it's a full spectrum blend. It includes 18 enzymes that support the breakdown of proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and fibers. When your body breaks food down more effectively, that can support smoother digestion, better nutrient absorption, and may help with occasional post-meal discomfort or bloating. No drama, no miracle claims, just supporting the process. Here's how I'm using it. I take 2 to 3 capsules with meals, especially heavier meals, and I'm paying attention over time to how I feel afterwards. The point is consistency, not chasing some overnight transformation. And here's the big trust piece. BiOptimizers back themselves with a 365-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it properly. And if it's not for you, you're not stuck with it. Just let them know, and they will refund you 100%. Here's what you get when you go to bioptimizers.com/trigger and use code TRIGGERnometry. 1. 15% off your entire order. 2. You get a free bottle of Mass Zymes, BiOptimizers' best-selling digestive enzyme, added to your order automatically when you use that code. That's a $20 product free on top of your discount. Go to BiOptimizers.com/trigger. Use code TRIGGERnometry and grab it before it's gone.
Yeah, I think there's an evolutionary answer to that, and that's it. Basically, both of those things, stalking and abuse, are unfortunately mate guarding functions. So let's take these one at a time. So abuse, whether it's physical or psychological abuse, and both are important, they're designed or have the effect of lowering the woman's self-perceptions of her desirability. And sometimes it literally lowers their desirability if she has bruises, scars, black eyes, and so forth. And so men tend to do it when there's a mate value discrepancy, and it has the effect of lowering the woman's self-perceptions of her desirability so that she feels sometimes even lucky that this guy's still with her. And some women even interpret the abuse as a sign of his love for her, is that he's so in love with her that he will do everything possible to keep her. So that's a dark side, that the abuse has this function. And stalking similarly occurs when there's a mate value discrepancy. And the typical scenario is that the woman dumps the guy and he doesn't want to get dumped because he realizes consciously or unconsciously that there is no way that he's going to be able to attract a woman of equivalent mate value as the woman who has just dumped him. And in our study, we did a study of 4,000 victims of stalking, and that's one of the things we found is the stalker has much lower mate value than the victim of the stalking. And so the mate value discrepancies predict that. And so these guys think, well, she was with me once, maybe I can get her back.
And yes, because when you look at that behavior, you will also, I was reading one of your studies and you were saying that stalking is a very good predictor of violence and then murder, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say a very good predictor. It statistically increases probability of. So I think criminal stalking, I mean, it should be taken very seriously, you know, and women should do. And one thing that women should realize is that the first 3 to 6 months after the breakup are the most dangerous times for women of being murdered by the ex. And it's typically when the guy realizes that it's permanent. It's a permanent break and that there's no way she's coming back. When that sinks in, that's the danger sign for women.
And let's talk about the flip side of it, because one of the things that we don't really talk about, we talk about male violence and towards women, of course we should, and you know, it's horrifying that women have to go through this, but we talk about it less, about female violence to men. So what do we know about that?
Yeah, well, what we know is that there is female violence to men, to their mates. It's typically less extreme. And so I think there right now is, there didn't used to be any, there's one in the country, one shelter for battered men in the country. That's up in Dallas, whereas there are thousands for battered women. And so that tells you something about it. So women do sometimes abuse their partners physically, but it typically does less damage.
And I imagine the number of victims will be incomparably small,
Yeah,
right? Is that fair?
Yeah, the number of victims is smaller. Now, some argue it depends on if you get, sometimes there's mutual abuse where they'll get into a physical confrontation where one will slap the other will slap back, or hit and hit back. And so you get some of that. And so if you simply count up the number of acts of violence, the sexes are actually not that wildly discrepant. But in terms of the damage done is much greater to men. And it's also predictable. The other predictor of it is if the guy suspects an infidelity or discovers an infidelity. That's a big predictor of abuse. And even more disturbing, perhaps, is if the woman gets pregnant.
By another man.
If she gets pregnant and there's a suspicion that it's not his. And in those cases, something like 50% of the physical blows to the woman are directed toward her abdomen, toward her pregnant belly. And so it seems like, and not consciously, but an effort to terminate a rival's offspring.
Wow.
So,
I mean,
Horrifying.
yeah, it is truly horrifying, but again, if we're ever going to have any success at solving these problems, we have to understand the circumstances in which they occur.
because when we talk about an issue such as rape, we interviewed a gentleman called Luke Gittos, who's a lawyer, who said that rape is an act of violence as opposed to a sexual act. But if you look at it through the lens of evolutionary psychology, and maybe I'm wrong, push back on it, I mean, it can serve an evolutionary purpose of, I want to impregnate this woman, she won't let me, therefore I have to do what I have to do.
Yeah, well, so here you have to look at it whether it's really people are confused about is it sex or is it violence? So from a woman's perspective, it is violence. From a man's perspective, it's often about sex, So why did you do this? The interviews with convicted rapists, they say, well, I wanted her sexually, and I knew there was no way she was going to have sex with me voluntarily, and so I forced myself on her. And so from a male perspective, it is often about sex. From a female perspective, it's about violence, because it is an act of violence. And so there's been a muddle of that. Is it sex or is it violence? Well, according to who? And it matters greatly whether you're asking a man or a woman. There is debate in the among evolutionary scientists about whether rape is an adaptation, whether we have adaptations to rape, or whether we don't, whether it's a byproduct of other things like desire for sexual variety, the fact that men have a higher sex drive than women, and other things like that. So, and it hasn't been resolved. And I myself, I don't have a strong opinion about whether there are adaptations to rape or whether it's a byproduct or not. And it's kind of unfortunate. It's such a loaded topic that you can't really do research on it, and you certainly can't get any funding to do good quality research on the topic because it's so politically loaded.
But that's quite, look, I understand why that may be that attitude, but you look at the number of women who have been raped or suffered sexual violence, this is an important topic. And if we can get to the bottom of why it happens and pull it apart, we might be able to protect women.
Yeah, exactly. That is my position exactly. But it's such a loaded political issue for many that they inhibit the active research into the topic. So even though it absolutely could benefit women if we knew more about it.
David, it's been great having you on the show. We're going to ask you some questions from our supporters in a second, but before we do, in the main interview, our final question is always the same, which is, what's the one thing we're not talking about as a society that we really should be?
Wow, that's a hard one. What's the one thing we're not talking about? Well, we've talked about some of the things that most people are not talking about. And rape would certainly be one of them. But I think, I guess what I would say is and this is partly, maybe touting my own work, but I've always been intrigued by understanding the darker sides of human nature. And they include the things we've been talking about: abuse, rape, murder, and why people do stalking, why people do these things. And so, but I think most people avoid these more, the darker sides of human nature. And I think that one of the things that evolutionary psychology does is it says, yes, we have this large collection of psychological adaptations for good stuff and for bad stuff. So for cooperation, for altruism, for helping, and all the good side of human nature, but we also have adaptations to do some nasty stuff, ranging from gossip to malicious behavior toward people we don't like, ranging all the way up to killing. And warfare is another one. So I think evolutionary psychology gives us a handle on the complexity of our nature. And, and this has been a perennial debate going back to philosophers like John Locke and others. Are humans fundamentally good, but corrupted by bad society or, capitalism or culture, or are humans fundamentally bad? And I think we're both. We have good elements and bad elements to our psychological nature, and both need to be understood.
I suppose it raises the question of what is it that activates those predilections, right? And that's perhaps where culture and morality come in, and religion too. Is that right?
Yeah. I think that's well put, and certainly one way to phrase it, because all adaptations, almost all adaptations just reside within our brains in a dormant status. They're quiescent until they are activated by external circumstances of one sort or another, like a mate value discrepancy, or a mate poacher hitting up on your partner, or cues to a partner's infidelity. It's always these external circumstances that activate a subset of our psychological mechanisms and then keeps others quiescent. So yeah, I think that's...
Well, what you're talking about is circumstance, but what I'm talking about is so there's three men in the room around the table. Mm-hmm. What determines how we act if we discover that our wife is cheating is we've been exposed to the same circumstances, but we might act differently based on the values been taught by parents, the cultural values of the society we live in, the religion we follow, the other things I'm trying to think off the top of my head. And that's kind of an interesting area, because it's a way of regulating these things that are latent in our brains, as you're saying.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. That's another interesting suite of topics of religion and morality and group norms, and the degree to which they have an influence on activating or deactivating some subset of our psychological adaptations.
Yeah, because sorry that I'm delving into it as far as I am, but I think it's interesting, because what it really makes, I think that's the way you've explained it, which is we have these adaptations in our brains and they're sitting there waiting to be triggered, we might say, or activated. That really puts a lot of emphasis, at least as I think about it, on creating values and social structures that regulate our behavior in those environments.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's really important.
Yes.
And if we don't do a good job of that, we're going to end up with people, otherwise decent people, running around doing terrible things because they haven't been prepared to avoid those pitfalls once those things are in place.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although I would say that there are, I think, elements of our morality that are part of our evolved psychology themselves. So fairness, for example. So like if they have these economic games where, let's say I give you $100 and you can give it's up to you how to distribute the $100. You can keep 99 for yourself and give one to your partner, or you can split it 50-50. And people show in these one-shot economic games that people who say get $1 on that, they decline the offer. And so if the person declines the offer, nobody gets anything. But they will decline it even though from a purely economic perspective, they should take the $1 because it's $1 or nothing, but they don't. And the reason is because we have an evolved sense of fairness, and we don't want to develop a reputation, a social reputation, as exploitable. And so if we are willing to accept unfair offers, we will develop an exploitable reputation. And so that's bad. But so I think that fairness is just one example, but I think that we have evolved standards of morality that are part of our evolved psychology and not just externally imposed by religion or parental instruction.
All right, head on over to triggerpod.co.uk where David answers your questions.
What traits humans consider attractive are most clearly linked to evolutionary psychology? And why is that trait seen as evolutionarily better by human beings?